What's up guys, Jivan back with another video. FNCS starts tomorrow, and so I thought it'd be nice if I just made a last second checklist of reminders, motivation, mindset tips, and more, just so you're going into FNCS with a good energy and the right game plan. Please consider hitting that like button, subbing if you're new, using code JivanTV, and let's hop into it. Timestamps are in the description if there's a certain question you're looking for. But we're going to start out with how you should be playing out your games. Let's get your game plan on point here. First game, one of the biggest questions is, should you play it safe or should you W key? Should you fight a ton of people? Here's my recommendation for you. If you're a pro level keyer, like you can drop really good games to start out the duo cash cups, then I would recommend trying it in FNCS as well. If you're a mid-level keying team like me and Rody, then I would recommend keying until you get a launch pad. When I say mid-level, I mean you can win a majority of fights, but it's not your greatest strength. You're not that confident in your fighting ability. Then like I said, I would just key until I get a launch pad or get that game-winning loot. But if keying isn't your strength, you're just really good at endgames, that's a-okay, just play it out till the end. But something really important to keep in mind is that the biggest issue in these tournaments is time. You don't want to be playing out an entire game if you're shambles, if you have bad loot. When I say bad loot, I don't necessarily mean gray guns. What I mean is more so having bad heals. If you don't have shield, you're going to be screwed when you get cracked in endgame. If somebody hits you for white damage, they will not stop spraying at you until you're dead, and then 20 minutes of your tournament is down the drain. That sets you back a lot. After you have your first good game, you should really try to play the rest out for endgame. If you're really down bad on loot and it's starting to approach the endgame, I would recommend taking a mid-game fight, that way you can get your loot up. Once everything on the map is looted, a lot of times there's not going to be much of an option other than to take a fight, but be patient and select the right fight. Try to get a fry ahead of time. Of course, if you're not confident with fighting, try to make other plans to become less shambles, like going to a gas station to buy minis, stuff like that. But the main points that you're going to get in this are from endgame, so try to be consistent. Last thing to note is if you're short on games, like you're running out of games but there's still a lot of time left, try to play as safe as possible. Look for a safe place to loot rather than a fight if you're shambles. Last thing you need to understand with how to play your games is timing. Here's the general rule of thumb. If there's 1 hour left in the tourney, you can play 3 full games all the way to the end. If there's 30 minutes left, you can play 2 games full all the way to the end. So with that in mind, that's like the perfect game timing. If you're starting a game with 50 minutes left, you're only going to have time to play 2 full games. So if you have extra games to spare, I would recommend W keying a little bit to get game-winning loot, since you have extra games and you have extra time. But if you start your game out at 1 hour exactly, I would try to play 3 games all the way to the end. That's the general rule with game timing. We're going to switch it up and talk about mindset for a little bit. Mindset is one of the most important things to qual in FNCS. I promise you, one of the biggest killers that's going to make people not qual to round 2 or round 3 when they 100% have the skill to qual is mindset. So here's some tips that you may need to hear going into FNCS. If at any moment in time you are down on points, don't stress about qualing. Focus on practicing for the next qualifier and keeping good vibes. Who knows, you might come back, but if your vibes go down the drain because you're behind, it is going to be a lot tougher for you to come back. Last season in FNCS, it was a lot harder to qual, but in the first qualifier, Cole and I started falling behind, and the vibes just got shot. Once the vibes were shot, I knew it was just over, bro. There was just a feeling of defeat in the air, but in reality, we only needed 1 game to qual. I don't know why we let our mindset get so bad, but in the next qualifier, we talked about it, and we were like, dude, if that ever happens again, we gotta stop it. We gotta keep the vibes up. Sure enough, that's exactly what we did, and we absolutely clutched qual, even when things looked hopeless. So I'm telling you, if you're down bad on points at any point, don't stress about qual. Just focus on doing your best and playing the game you love. And bad games happen. It's all good. It only takes 2 games to qual anyway. Think about it, top 2,000 qual on each region to round 2. I'm telling you, you could be an hour and a half in and have like 10 points, and then you have 1 or 2 good games, and all of a sudden, you're way ahead. No matter how many bad games in a row, you can come back, especially with this format, bro. Top 2,000 qual, that's gonna make it pretty low points to qualify. Not extremely low, but pretty low. And then for round 2, top 500 out of the top 2,000 qual. In that round, it's going to be such low points qual, but the games are going to be absolutely stacked. But the main thing I'm trying to stress here is don't stress. 1 or 2 good games and you're back, no matter how bad you're doing. Now, one big thing, and this is personal preference, it depends on what type of duo you have, I try to avoid talking about mistakes mid-tourney unless it's something that could really reshape the future of your tourney. Like let's say it's an off-spawn strat or something that you can apply to your next game. Those are the type of things that you might want to talk about in between games, but if there's something like, bro, why did you miss your shots? You'd be so dumb to say that, bro. It's just going to bring the vibes down. Remember, we're all the same. We're playing the game we love. We're all human. Well, maybe except Mr. Savage. But try to keep the vibes up, man. Don't blame your teammate for their mistakes in the moment. Go over mistakes after the tourney. That's what VOD reviewing is for. I know for a fact when I get blamed or there's bad vibes in between games, my vibes just go down the drain. And your teammate might be the same way, so be careful what you say. Lastly, when you're in low point lobbies, just know 99% of the players in that lobby are mad scared, or they have no idea what they're doing. So be confident in your strategies and in your mechanics. And of course, have fun. FNCS is freaking lit if you don't take it too seriously. But if you stress the whole time, you're not going to have the fun that the rest of us are having. So go out there, do your best, and just keep the vibes up. You got this. Next part of this video, I want to give you a little checklist for early game, mid game, and end game. First off, early game. Have a drop spot set up. I know this is obvious, but the main thing that I'm trying to stress here is stick to your drop spot. A lot of people will see once they go into FNCS that maybe their drop spot is contested and they really don't want to fight off spawn, but going somewhere new is going to only make you mess up more. Stick to what you know for the entire tourney. If you're really that nervous about early game, I would recommend building a second drop spot and getting comfortable with that. That way you have a backup plan, and if it really is going bad at your one drop spot, you can go to the other one that you're already comfortable with. But just remember, there's 3 sets of qualifiers, so if your drop spot doesn't work in the first one, you can always get a new one for the next one. But yeah, make sure you have your drop spot set up with game plans, like where to push if you're going to fight, or where to go to get metal, cars, etc. Figure out all that stuff going into the tourney and you'll be much more confident with your early game strategies. For the mid game, Storm Surge is going to be active a lot during FNCS. So when rotating your first to third zones, try to position yourself in areas where you have viewpoints, such as mountains or high up in an open flatland, like places that you can see other players rotating. And on top of that, try to rotate as early as possible. It's really crucial to have your loop pass down so that you can do it efficiently and get to surge locations fast. You could always fight off spawn to get your Storm Surge and then you won't have to worry about it till like moving zones. But usually for me and Rody, one of us will carry an AR into end games and just look for surge tags throughout the mid to late game. End game is kind of hard to give tips on, but here's a few that I could think of. Always be on the lookout for these 3 rotational strategies: launch pads, sprints through zone, or cars laying around the map. Something that I see a lot of people do is first moving zone, if they don't have a launch pad, their only priority is, okay, we're going to reuse a launch pad. But if you go into the moving zone thinking that and then somebody around you doesn't lay a launch pad, you're going to be shambles and not know what to do. So always go through that checklist in your mind. Are there any cars laying around that I can go reuse? Is there a free sprint to zone that we should use rather than risking waiting for a launch pad? Stuff like that. One thing I will say though is if you're on the back edge of the moving zone, like the moving zone is pulling all the way across, then that's one of those situations where you're probably going to need to reuse a launch pad. Something you can do to make it easier is build up layers, get some elevation so that you can scout a little bit easier. And also just build a few boxes towards the zone so that you have room to move and extra time to find a launch pad. Another thing to keep in mind is when you get low on mats in endgame, don't forget to try to look for tarps to sneak into. You could literally rotate an entire zone through somebody's tunnel and not have to use a single build. And you can also a lot of times get a fry on them and get the kill and then get a big refresh. Now, if you get a big refresh second zone or later, you should probably try to look for high ground. That's called a game-winning refresh right there. Once you get that winning refresh towards the end of the moving zones, always try to prioritize positioning next, either ulti low ground or ulti high ground. Those are probably going to be the 2 best. If you're in a really stacked endgame, a mid-game layer could do you good as well, but the last thing you want is to be in a top 3 situation. There's a team above you, a team below you, and they're both spraying you from both sides. That's why it's usually better to get either height or low ground. Hopefully those tips help you out. The last part of this video, I'm going to give you a few tips for fighting. First off, don't get too close to where you can get boxed. People are always going to be looking to box you like a fish, and then it's a 2v1 in that box. So keep your distance, pressure safely. I like to pressure boxes from angles rather than dead on, because if you're just up against their wall, like I said, they're going to try to box you. It's the spray meta, so always try to be pressuring. Sometimes all it takes is 2 angles of spray to get a knock. If you're just constantly switching up angles, counting down, doing spray plays, a lot of times you'll bleed a lot of bullets in, get them weak, and then you can just 50-50 to end the fight. If you're ever on low ground in a fight and they're like spraying you, you know, that tough situation, here's how you handle it. Give it a few seconds, see how aggressive they are, see if you can box one of them, but if you cannot, count down and crank and try to initiate a build fight. If you just stay on low ground and let them keep spraying you from a distance, you're eventually going to go down. If you're low on mats though, that may not work and you're going to have to try to just psycho one of the players. Lastly, if you're trying to play the tourney out without fighting and you're being psychoed like crazy, sometimes you just got to suck it up and take that fight. Don't have the full mindset of run from every single fight. Because if you run from a really aggressive team and they get a beam on you, they're just not going to stop and you got to get some pressure back on them. That's all my tips for this video. I hope it helps you guys out. Go out there, beat your best scores, do your best, and most importantly, have fun. Don't forget to hit that like button, sub if you're new, use code JivanTV, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.